Happy Founders Day, everyone! Welcome to the Robert B. and Meta J. Silliman Library. Today, we celebrate Founders Day through milestones, recollection of right on this year, 1921, 2021. This is 2021 milestones looking back with the one who could best do it, Dr. T. Valentino S. Sitoy, a man that all Sillimanians are so proud of. To start with, ladies and gentlemen, shall we all rise from wherever you are, from whichever time zone you are? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. But let's start with a prayer by the Reverend Arnel Fowler.
Let us pray. Almighty God, what a beautiful day that you have gathered us in this place. Be with us even with those who are virtually connected in this affair, and bind us together as we celebrate the 120th Founders Day of our beloved Silliman University. Inspire us and instill in us the beauty and significance of each event happened in the past and made it into one beautiful story. Strengthen us in this time of pandemic as we face so many challenges, that we may be able to move on, carrying out the vision and mission of our founding parents. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Fowler, for leading us into that important point in Silliman's tradition. We always start everything with a prayer. And now we will all be welcomed by the beautiful Mrs. Goodhart. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the acting chief librarian of Silliman University, Mrs. Rose Dinoy, to give us the welcome remarks.
As we celebrate the 120th Founders Day of Silliman University, I welcome you all to this symbolic activity, all in honor of our alma mater. The Silliman University Virtual Library provides creative and innovative library activities, programs, and services. These activities are interactive and engaging, which are accessible and open to everybody. One of our activities is the e-talk, facilitated by an expert in the field of history of Silliman and with sterling record in the university. Welcome as we listen to our speaker on the Silliman milestone in the 2021. We will be listening a lot of stories about Silliman. These stories will not only be cheerful as the Silliman song, "Here's a cheer, boys, 3 times 3, but also stories that journey the important events of our students, administrators, and whole Silliman community.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to start Silliman Milestones, recalled in 2021 with the one and only Dr. Valentino S. Sitoy. Just a little background, ladies and gentlemen. This man, actually a very good-looking man. People from the 1960s, those who were on Silliman campus in the 1960s, he was like a campus heartthrob. And not just presence, but also brilliance. Can you imagine that? Graduating summa cum laude in 1963. And today, we look at him as like Silliman's Einstein, but what we actually love about him is that he's like the walking Silliman history, or even the walking Philippine history book, because everything that we want to know about the Philippines, Silliman, and all aspects of this archipelago can always be understood from the point of view of where it all started point of departure is always historical fact, historical truth. So today, let's look at Silliman University from the perspective, from the point of view of a historian. So these are all milestones. And let's start with looking into the Silliman family. You know, every American family has a start. The roots is always Europe. So which part of Europe did the Sillimans come from? Let's find that out today. Also, we will find out more, like everybody is talking about $10,000 donation of Dr. Horace B. Silliman, the man, the visionary who really started all, and we honored him with the name of the school. But was it only $10,000? I heard there's more than $10,000 because he never stopped giving until 1907. All right, so let's find that out also. And there are more to find out. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome into our homes Dr. T. Valentino Sitoy, the best way to celebrate Founders Day.
I've been asked to talk about Silliman Milestones. So I would like to call this Silliman Milestones Recalled in 2021. A milestone is either a road marker to indicate the distance in miles to a particular place, or an event marking a significant stage in the development of an institution or something. For this presentation, we shall use milestone in its second sense, referring to events that mark a significant stage in the history of Silliman University. The original milestone that started the history of what is now Silliman University was an inspired idea in 1898 and the mind of Dr. Horace B. Silliman to give funds to start a school in the Philippines which he never visited for a people he had not met. So, who was this American who lived from 1825 to 1910? According to the studies of the famous 19th century American science educator Dr. Benjamin Silliman of Yale University, the Silliman family originally came from Rome. Yes, Rome in Italy. In the 15th century, one Claudio Sillimandi, ending in D-I, and his family left Rome for Lucca in northern Italy. And later, he left Italy altogether on account of religious persecution at the time and fled across the border to Bern in Switzerland. In Switzerland, he and his people, several generations of his descendants, would remain as free citizens. Now, what religious persecution at the time could have made the Sillimandi family flee to Switzerland? The only possibility is the persecution of the Waldensians. The Waldensians were a people who followed the movement of a rich cloth merchant of France, Pierre de Vaux or Peter Waldo. The Waldensians were a 13th century medieval Christian movement that urged voluntary poverty and religious simplicity. Unfortunately, they were called heretics and were persecuted. But 300 years later, they joined the Protestants during the 16th century Reformation. And today, the largest Protestant church in Rome is a Waldensian church called La Chiesa Evangelica Valdesi. Okay. In Switzerland, the Silliman family changed their name to Silliman. Then some of them migrated to Holland and then to the United States. Horace Silliman was a sixth-generation descendant of one Daniel Silliman, who was the first Silliman to migrate from Holland to the United States. As a businessman, Horace Silliman made his money by owning the largest cotton mills in Cohoes in northern New York State. In the second half of the 19th century, Cohoes was the center of the cotton mill industry in the United States and perhaps in the whole world. That's because of the many waterfalls that generated power. And Horace was one of the richest men in the United States, but he was also one of America's greatest philanthropists. In Cohoes, New York, he gave to many charities and built a church subsequently named Silliman Memorial Presbyterian Church. According to a pastor who knew his life very well, Dr. Silliman, though very rich, lived very simply and thought of himself simply as trustee of the wealth at his disposal. He had a list of Christian programs, projects, and causes, which he supported through regular donations. $500 each for small ones, or $10,000 each for larger ones. Today, $500 and $10,000 would be equal or would be worth $15,500 and $310 respectively. Multiply that by 50, you'd know how many pesos that would be. In 1926, Dr. David S. Hibbard, president of Silliman University, or at the time Silliman Institute, said of Dr. Horace Silliman, he gave to churches in the United States and to colleges of all sizes. He was a strong supporter of the work for the education of the colored people in the South, that is Southern USA, and he reached out to the mission fields of the church. He was a man whose whole life was dedicated to Christian service, and his influence will never die as long as the institutions which he founded, like Silliman University, continue to function. We always hear that Dr. Silliman gave $10,000 to start Silliman Institute. That is only part of the story. To the original $10,000 in 1901, Dr. Silliman added another $10,000 in 1902, and another $10,000 again in 1903, and in 1905, and at one time I think $30,000 in one go. In 1926, Dr. David Hibbard wrote that by the time of his death in 1910, Dr. Horace Silliman had given to the school, meaning Silliman University, the total of 140,000 pesos or 70,000 US dollars. This would come to $1.98 million today, or about 100 million Philippine pesos. This was 1 month's gift of Christian love to us, so that we Sillimanians could have the kind of high standard education with Christian values that today we are privileged to possess. Dr. Silliman's total gift of $70,000 to Silliman Institute was equal to 7% of his total donations to charity and other worthy causes during his entire lifetime. It was also the largest single gift he gave to overseas missions. Indeed, what is now the university named after him is Dr. Silliman's unequaled gift to us Filipinos. Like his Waldensian forebears, who urged voluntary poverty and a life of religious simplicity, Dr. Silliman approximated voluntary poverty for his life. This was why he considered himself not the owner, but only the trustee of the wealth that God had given him.
What a very good way to celebrate Founders Day! Wow! Dr. Sitoy giving us enlightenment. So refreshing. It was good to know the Silliman family. It's like coming from someone who really dig like gemstones and reintroducing to us the man behind this great vision we now call Silliman University. And when we talk about Founders Day, a lot of us would only think of Dr. Hibbard and Mrs. Laura Hibbard. And we have forgotten Dr. Horace Silliman. And yet we carry the name Silliman. And we are so proud of being Silliman University. But at this point, let's really get to know the Hibbards. It's time for us to really get to know them, because they were the ones who came here and really established the dream school that was in the mind of Dr. Silliman. So ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we'll bring you back Dr. Sitoy with his milestones, looking deep into the Hibbards. David and Laura, where they come from, when did they come from, and their achievements, fully establishing what we now celebrate, 120th birthday of Silliman University. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. T. Valentino Sitoy on the Hibbards.
We are talking about Silliman Milestones, that is, important stages in the development of Silliman University. The next Silliman milestone was laid by the Reverend Dr. and Mrs. David Sutherland Hibbard. They are the second American Presbyterian missionary couple to arrive in the Philippines in 1899 after the Reverend Dr. and Mrs. James Burton Rogers. The Reverend David Sutherland Hibbard, who lived from 1868 to 1966, and his wife, Laura Crooks Hibbard, studied at the Presbyterian College of Emporia in Emporia, Kansas. This was a Presbyterian college founded in 1882. There, David Hibbard earned his BA degree in 1893. Then from there he also finished his MA degree as well as his BD degree from the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University. Hibbard would later receive an honorary Doctor of Philosophy degree from Hanover College in 1904 and an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from Emporia College in 1913. On the other hand, Laura Hibbard earned her bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Philosophy degree from the College of Emporia in 1896. In 1921, the College of Emporia would also bestow on her an honorary LLD degree. The Hibbards' success in opening Silliman Institute in 1901 was largely due to the friendship and the welcome accorded him by the people he met in Dumaguete when he first visited Dumaguete during a survey trip in October 1899. He was then looking for a good location for the third Presbyterian mission station in the Philippines after Manila, which was the first, and Iloilo, which was the second. And the location of the third mission station would probably be the location also of the school envisioned by the Presbyterian Board in New York. Now, those who gave him welcome at Dumaguete were the Reverend Major John B. Randolph, a Methodist minister and regimental chaplain of the 6th U.S. Infantry Regiment, then stationed in Negros. Major Randolph had been befriended by the Negros Oriental Revolutionary Governor Don Demetrio Larena, and also by Don Demetrio's elder brother, Don Militon Larena, who was then the mayor of Dumaguete, as well as Don Demetrio Larena's son-in-law, Colonel Hermenegildo Villanueva, commander of the Negros Oriental Revolutionary Forces, later governor and then congressman for Negros Oriental, and still later senator of the Philippines. The Larenas were very enthusiastic about Dr. Hibbards' announcement of a school that their Presbyterian mission was going to establish somewhere. They urged him to choose Dumaguete for its location. And I think one reason why the Larenas wanted that was because they compared Negros Oriental and Negros Occidental. Negros Oriental had many plains, rolling plains, full of sugar haciendas. But Negros Oriental has only a small strips of coastal plains, except in Manhoyod, Baez, Tanhay, and Siaton. But all the rest of the province is hilly. So if we cannot develop something out of sugar for development, why not develop something for the mind? That was their hope, that the Presbyterian mission would place the school they were envisioning here in Dumaguete City. So the Larenas urged Hibbard to choose Dumaguete for its location for the third mission station. And when Hibbard and a fellow Presbyterian missionary named Dr. Andrew Hall returned to Dumaguete to start serious plans, the Larenas provided a man, Senor Laureano Flores, then Vice Mayor of Dumaguete, who was willing to sell land for the school at the very edge of town. You see, the very edge of town was Calle Santa Cecilia, which is now Silliman Avenue. And you know where is the campus of Silliman? Just next to Silliman Avenue, which was then the edge of the town. So they were willing to sell land owned by the Floreses right next to the town. That's how much, they valued the school that the Presbyterian missionaries hoped to establish it in Dumaguete. Now, the land offered, which was the first purchase for Silliman, is the area of what is now the administration building and the quadrangle next to it. Did not include the cafeteria. That was bought later. This means that the people of Dumaguete gave land to the school at the very edge of the town, and there was a house at the edge of that lot which was supposed to where there were trees supposed to be inhabited by an aswang. They were going to give that for free with the entire purchase. Now, to help plan for the curriculum of Silliman Institute, the Presbyterian Board sent to Dumaguete a well-experienced educator, Dr. John C.R. Ewing, president of Foreman Christian College in what is now Lahore, Pakistan, but at that time, part of British India. So the curriculum of Silliman prepared students from elementary to college, and benefited not only from the American model, but also from the British model of education. But in opening the school, Dr. and Mrs. Hibbard were helped the most by one person, namely Governor Larena. When the Hibbards transfer from Iloilo to Dumaguete was delayed, Governor Larena sent a special courier to Iloilo to deliver in person a letter to Dr. Hibbard asking why they were delayed in coming to Dumaguete. Governor Larena was also the greatest recruiter of students for Silliman. He wrote letters to town mayors urging them to send their sons to Silliman, as he himself was sending his son and his nephew to the school. Of the first 16 students of Silliman, all were sons of mayors and other leading men in the province, and easily paid their tuition fees, except for 2 Ilonggo boys who came with the Hibbards from Iloilo as their household help. Thus, Silliman Institute opened on August 28, 1901. There is a picture showing Dr. Hibbard and the first 16 boys in his class. This appears in a Presbyterian Mission Journal, and I think the date was July 1902. The 16 boys on the first day quickly rose in number as people began to hear of this new American school in Dumaguete. By the end of 1901, the enrollment had risen to about 84. We are fortunate to have pictures of Silliman students in Dr. Hibbard's first class and then of the whole group at the end of that year. The visit of the Reverend Dr. and Mrs. Arthur Johnson Brown. Dr. Brown was a Presbyterian board member for Asia who came to Dumaguete on September 26, 1901. Now, there is a very famous postcard showing the beach with 4 people carrying a chair coming towards the camera, which probably was the boat, and buildings, 2 buildings shown in the background. Now, I have seen this published with the date 1904 or 1903. It's impossible to have that date. Because if this were 1903 or 1904, we should be seeing a Silliman building, the first building of Silliman on the beach. And besides, what we are seeing on the left side of that picture is a house that looks very much like the house where the first classes of Silliman were held, as photographed in 1925. Now, if you compare them, this is practically the house. And if you look carefully at that house, there are 16 figures in front of it, lined in a row. I think those were the 16 boys who first came on August 28 and will still 16 on September 26. And there's a story behind them. Mrs. Hibbard tells the story that when they were expecting Dr. and Mrs. Arthur Johnson Brown, to come to Dumaguete, he prepared the boys to welcome Dr. and Mrs. Brown. Since these are sons of mayors, etc., they have coats. No, not coat. Coats and pants, Nothing, no ties. But they all had these wonderful suits. And this time, they wore shoes. But then when Dr. or Mrs. Hibbard was looking at them, said, there's something lacking. So, what he did was to cut up some spare curtains into sashes, and she gave each boy a sash to wrap around his waist, and picture them in white and red. It was so wonderful. And that's, I think, the beginning of the Silliman colors, red and white. It started in September 26, 1901. You don't find this anywhere in any book, but it's the story given by Mrs. Hibbard. And I think there's no other explanation for the red and white. This is the only place where red and white is spoken of, aside from the fact that the College of Emporia also has red and white. Okay. Now, we now talk about the educational philosophy of Silliman. The educational philosophy of Silliman was first published in the first catalog issued, which was issued in 1903. It's all in Spanish. And the ones who printed this were Silliman students who were working in the Silliman Press. And what the Silliman educational philosophy simply says is that it believes that in addition to the development of the mind, there is need to develop the spirit and the values of each person, so that with intellectual and the physical also goes spiritual development. And this has been what has been the characteristic of Silliman education from the very beginning. As early as 1905, a year before the Iloilo Nurses Training School began, Dr. Hibbard and the Presbyterian Board had made tentative explorations of the possibility of offering a course on domestic science. This is home economics. Since this course was generally associated with women's natural interests and preferences, this suggests that the idea of admitting girls to Silliman had been considered at that very early date, 1905. The fact, however, is that Silliman for years remained unprepared to accept girls, which was the result of the difficulties and the dragging character of historical inertia. Before long, however, reason and justice made it increasingly difficult and embarrassing to maintain the refusal to admit girls into Silliman. Whatever good or valid reasons were given, the basic question of equality and equal access to education could not be so easily set aside. So in 1912, no less than the provincial fiscal of Negros Oriental, Attorney Manuel Mendieta Blanco, a good friend of the Hibbards and ex-governor Demetrio Larina, was then, Larina being the only Filipino member of the Board of Trustees. Now, Fiscal Blanco eagerly asked the same perennial question: would you admit girls to Silliman? Blanco had a daughter who was graduating from the Bacolod High School in March of that year. So this was the impetus which convinced the Silliman administration that it was high time to resolve with the issue once and for all and come up with a just and sensible policy on the matter. Fiscal Blanco was a good friend of the Hibbards, the other Silliman missionaries, and with Governor Larina. This is because when Negros Oriental was officially constituted into a province on May 1, 1901 under the Philippine Commonwealth, for which reason Governor General Taft came to Dumaguete with his whole retinue. Now, 3 appointments at the time were made. The first appointment was that of Don Demetrio Larena as the first provincial governor of Negros Oriental under the American regime. The second appointment was of Major Henry Pitt as the first provincial treasurer. And the third appointment was that of Attorney Blanco as the first provincial fiscal. So this was how Blanco and Larena were officially and personally related to one another. So, at the next Board of Trustees meeting, which was held on the afternoon of Tuesday, March 5, 1912, the day before commencement, the Board of Trustees of Silliman, with one Filipino member, namely Governor Larena, voted unanimously to admit girls as regular students of Silliman. The only proviso was that they should come only during their higher years, and they should live as externas, that is, non-boarding students, because Silliman had no dormitory facilities for girls. In the Silliman Institute Catalog and Announcements for the year 1912 to 1913, this appears for the first time a new item titled Young Ladies. It reads, at a meeting of the Board of Trustees, it was decided to admit young ladies as externas to the higher classes. The applicants for admission must have completed the first 2 years of the high school course in all classes, and where there is a high school in that province which gives a 4-year course, they must have completed the 4-year course. Thus, Fiscal Blanco's daughter, Pora Gonzaga Blanco, became the first woman student to be regularly admitted to Silliman Institute in June 1912. Fortunately, we have a picture of Pora Blanco, and she is quite a beauty. This is well said. If you want people to come to Silliman, you should have people of this sort. So Pura Blanco was born in Manila about 1896 and was one of the 8 children of the Manila lawyer Manuel Mendieta Blanco and his wife Ana Gonzaga of Bacolod, Negros Occidental. Pura had finished her secondary studies at Bacolod High School in March 1912. She therefore came to Silliman in June 1912 as a junior student in the Bachelor of Arts program, which at that time was a 2-year course after graduation from high school. At the same time, her younger brother Arturo was admitted into the Silliman Grade 3 class. By this time, Silliman required as a prerequisite for admission to the elementary grades, completion of grades 1 and 2 in the public schools, so that those coming to Silliman already had the rudiments of English. 2 years later, in June 1914, Pura's youngest brother Eduardo Juan Blanco, E.G. Blanco, after whom one street of Dumaguete is named because he was the future World War II hero of Dumaguete, who gave to the Americans plans for, or actually the plan of the Dumaguete airport where the Japanese had their planes, and when those plans were sent to Australia and when the Americans came to bomb the airfield of Dumaguete, they got all the planes. Now, Miss Blanco immediately became the muse, not only of her junior class, but of the entire institute. She was also unanimously elected secretary of the junior class and treasurer of the senior literary class. Her ways impressed everyone. Mrs. Hibbard subsequently recounted. You know, Mrs. Hibbard has a lot of stories to tell. She recounted that when the Presbyterian Board Secretary came for a visit in 1913, he was impressed with the refined, unspoiled bearing of our first young lady, whose name, significantly enough, was Miss Pure White, Pura Blanco. Also, I think it was at this time that Mrs. Hibbard said that the secretary asked the boys, how many of you have sisters who would like to come to Silliman? And all the boys practically raised their hands. Now, so the graduating seniors of 1912-1913 were jealous of the juniors' poorest class for their good fortune and expressed their sentiments in the Silliman Annual of 1913, which they put out in March of that year. In that publication, the graduating seniors had a lost and wanted page. Among the lost items was a mustache belonging to the Reverend William J. Smith, who probably shaved it off finally. On the other hand, the wanted column included the following items. 1. Wanted, a girl classmate. Request by the senior class. Second, wanted, girls dormitory. Requested by Silliman students. Third, wanted, some cakes made by a domestic science girl. Personal request by the certain Mr. Pedro F. Cervillas. Unlike girls' education in Spanish times, when colegialas were taught homemaking arts like embroidery, cooking, sewing, to prepare them to be good wives and mothers, the classical course in Silliman offered to women students were the same courses given to their male classmates. Pora, Blanco, and the other Silliman girls who followed her showed they could very well hold their own within the academic community. In fact, Pora Blanco graduated salutatorian. And what about the courses that Pora Blanco said? I'll just give you an example. Junior year, first semester, literature, 4 units. German, Spanish, or Latin, 3 units. Chemistry, 8 units. Advanced algebra, 5 units. Political economy, 4 units. Bible, major prophets, 3 units. Second semester, literature again, 4 units. German, Spanish, or Latin again, 3 units. Chemistry again, 8 units. Plain trigonometry, 5 units. Psychology, 4 units. Bible, this time minor prophets, 3 units. And for her senior year, it will be interesting. Well, what you have? Literature, 6 units. Physics, 8 units. Geology for Miss Blanco, 4 units. Logic, 5 units. Ethics, 4 units. Second semester, literature, 6 units. Physics, 8 units. Astronomy, 4 units. Philosophy, 4 units. Bible and theism and Christian evidence, 5 units. So the girls of Silliman had the same course as their male classmates. So immediately after graduation, Pura had no trouble finding a job. She graduated as salutatorian, and as soon as she submitted her job application after graduation in March 1914, she was immediately accepted by Mr. Christian Skateball, Division Superintendent of Schools of Negros Oriental, with recommendation from Mr. Bert Osborne, principal of the Negros High School. Now, in June 1913, 7 new girls followed the example of Miss Blanco. This included Miss Alejandra B. Santiago of Iloilo City and 5 recent graduates of the Negros Oriental Provincial High School, namely Miss Crispina Flores and 4 others simply known as Mrs. Guinafi, Sindyong, Dasalia, and Tivis. Thereafter, increasingly more girls came to Silliman from as far north as Baguio City or the Ilocos and as far south as Sulu or Davao. Now here is another picture of question date. It is an assembly in the assembly hall. In Dr. Hibbards' album, it is given the date 1916. A Presbyterian board pamphlet of 1916 carries this picture without date. Once or twice, this picture has appeared in local Silliman publications with the date about 1910. That is impossible. Not about 1910. The first girl to come to Silliman came in June 1912. How can this be 1910? One publication calls this the baccalaureate service. The problem, there's another problem. The problem is that no girl graduated in 1916. There was one in 1914, that Miss Blanco. Another in 1915. Another in 1917, but none in 1916. Pictures at the time show that the girl looks like Miss Alejandrina Santiago, who later on became Mrs. Lim. And so, we know the girl in the picture is Miss Santiago, and the picture is dated 1915. They should fix all questions once and for all. The question is asked, why does Silliman always have superior instruction? Well, the founders and first teachers being Americans, is that surprising that from the very beginning, Silliman used English as the medium of instruction. Beginning 1904 also, Silliman accepted new students only for grade 3 and above, not for grade 1 and 2. They should go to the public schools, learn English there, and then apply to Silliman. This means that nobody beginning 1904 was admitted into Silliman unless he or she has some proficiency in English oral communication. But there's something more that was exclusive to Silliman at the time. Beginning 1903, 3 women faculty members of Silliman, namely Mrs. Laura Hibbard, who taught language, Mrs. Eleanor Langheim, who taught English reading and writing, and Mrs. Rebecca McIntyre, who taught English and elocution, organized the so-called Literary Society. The purpose of the Literary Society was to inculcate among the students a desire for and the enjoyment of literature. Membership and participation was required of all Silliman students without exception. The society had regular meetings every Friday afternoon from 4 to 5, and all students were made to participate in English essay writing, recitations, and debates, interspersed with music in order to break the monotony. Later, as the Silliman curriculum became more complex, literary society meetings were held fortnightly. By 1907, the original single literary society had been divided into 2, each with its own officers and faculty advisors. The society for the older students from grade 4 and up was called the Senior Literary Society. It held regularly declamation contests, debates, and compositions. So outside the classroom, this was the most effective means of gaining proficiency in both written and spoken English. On the other hand, the society for younger students, meaning students from grades 1 to 3 or grade 3, was called Junior Literary Society. Unless close faculty supervision, its purpose was to give training to the youngest Silliman students in writing and public speaking in the English language. By 1910, the Senior Literary Society held its program for the general public. These were composed of orations, declamations, and musical numbers. This always drew large audiences, with the venue, the Silliman Assembly Hall, bursting to the seams all the time. So successful was that experiment that the public presentation thereafter became a regularly yearly affair, with students from the Negros Oriental High School being given special invitation to attend. The Silliman Library began in school year 1906 to 1907 with a gift of 2 cases of books from Dr. Harry Church, a prominent American educator and at the time principal of the Cicero Snickley Township High School in Cicero, Illinois. Dr. Church was a former classmate of Dr. Hibbard at the College of Emporia in Emporia, Kansas in 1889 to 1893. Mrs. Laura Hibbard was also there at that time and was a freshman when Hibbard was in the classical course. So Mrs. Hibbard also knew Dr. Church. The books that Dr. Church sent to Dumaguete were placed in 2 bookcases in a room at the original Silliman Hall and placed under the care of the dormitory manager, who was Mr. Carlos Smith. That building no longer is no longer existing today because it has been replaced by the present administration building. So when the south wing of Silliman Hall was built in 1908, we are referring now to the existing old Silliman Hall. The books were transferred to a small library and reading room in this new wing, which was an anteroom to the president's office at the southeast corner of the enlarged building. Although it was meant to be temporary, the library remained in the president's office in the next temporary 8 years. Now, that's too small a place for a growing library. So where to put the library? Fortunately, other units of the Institute were doing things, on their own. The College of Arts and Sciences had a science building for the laboratories. And this science building, this laboratory, it's a one-story affair, stood at the present site of the University cafeteria today. It was one story, the same site but one story. It was a bungalow erected along Hibbard Avenue. Now, in 1917, the old library building became, or the old library, the old laboratory, rather. That laboratory became the new library of Silliman. And the reason why, well, there's a new science building built. Now, the science building now, facing Hibbard Hall. And in that science building were new labs. And so the old laboratory, standing at the base of the present cafeteria, was free and it became the library.
Thumbs up for Dr. Sitoy. We are learning so much about Silliman history. Wow! Now we know where Silliman song comes from and a lot more. Thank you so much, Dr. Sitoy.
You're welcome.
And promise us to have a part 2. Now, guys, I know you have questions in mind. Please comment down below. Write your question. We'll list it down and give it to Dr. Sitoy so that part 2 will include the answers to your questions. This is Silliman history rolling and rolling through the milestones as recollected by the one and only Valentino Sitoy Jr., our very own. Happy Founders Day, everyone!
Yes.
God bless everyone!
Yes,
Happy Founders Day!
yes.
Yes, Happy Founders Day!
Yes, naturally.